make sure that we're in.
Yes, we're good to go.
Leah's here.
And the phone is letting us do landscape, but the tablet will not. So.
Technology.
The joys of technology.
Yay.
But good evening, everybody. Hope that you're all doing well, and let me go and get my
computer on and get ready. You're not. No, ma'am, no. I'm gonna move that.
Move what? Oh, the step stool. Okay. Like, what'd I do?
Not you, her, because she's gonna be on that table.
They all were thinking that.
All right, and
it was surrounded by cats.
Computer's muted. And there we are. What do you know?
Alrighty.
And we have a few people watching already.
So as you can
Does
see,
it
we
even
have
me
some
and Mom?
skellies. There's skellies on that side too. That's the last of the Harry Potter ensemble. I got my elves and my Professor Flitwick up.
Yep. And we have already Dana. Good evening, Dana.
What's up,
Rick.
Dana?
And what?
What's up, Dana?
Yeah. And Rick. Good evening, Rick. Hope
Hello.
you're doing well as well. But yeah, and so here we are, 2 weeks away from Christmas, and we got back-to-back shows for you this week and next.
Yes.
And the theme is
Victorian Christmas,
Victorian
but we're
Christmas.
doing American stories
Yes.
from that time period.
Yep. So last couple of years we've covered some Victorian Christmas stories from English authors.
Yep.
But yeah,
I found American ones.
there are some American ones as well. So yes, and Alex, good evening, and Patrick, hello. Merry original spooky season. Yes. So
yes, it
that
is.
is why we are doing this tonight, is because Christmas, the depths of winter, the winter solstice, was traditionally the spooky season. There wasn't really much else going on, honestly.
Yeah, the harvest was done. That was done in October, early November. And so now is the time you get to hang out with your friends by the fire, which we have going.
Yep.
And
We had to choose between putting the tree on and putting the fire on. So
tree one tonight.
the tree one for tonight, it just seems appropriate for the season. So and the topic.
Yes.
But yeah, so that's what we. Oh, you're all good, Lee. We have Lee over here too.
I'm wearing red plaid pants, if that helps.
That works.
And eating chocolate.
I'm eating candy, yeah.
Yeah. So
and they got a gift.
Mm-hmm.
So-
I got socks.
yes, because 'tis the season. So,
Yes.
but yeah, it's been a few weeks since we last talked.
Yes.
Last time it was pre-Black Friday. We did the whole
Haunted shopping.
spooky shopping thing, spirits of the shops, and we hope that everybody's gotten off to a very good start with their holiday season. We hope you all had a great Thanksgiving, and that
Hope you enjoyed the snow this morning.
yes, we got a little dusting of snow here in Richmond. Definitely did not stick around very long,
No, but it was pretty.
yes, it was very pretty
I was
for
like,
the short time it lasted. And yeah, and now here we are. It is certainly our slow season as far as people coming out and walking around and getting spooky stories that way with us. But it's to be expected.
Yes.
A lot going on this
Yes.
time of year, and yeah.
But it also moves us into the time of year that we do our special events. So again, we do have special events starting up in January with our first haunted public dinner that haven't had that in a while.
Yeah, that'll be our first one.
I'm excited about the other one.
Nico, stop.
Hey, buddy. No.
Just causing trouble.
Need
But,
a void.
You have a cold?
And we will also be having our, of course, partnership with the John Marshall House. So we will have those tours going where you're inside with CPRI and the John Marshall docents, and they'll be telling you all the fun stuff that they've experienced and recorded during investigations, and then we'll take you outside around the Corridon neighborhood and tell you some more spooky stories.
Yeah. But yeah, you don't necessarily have to wait for that. We do effectively have availability every night. So yeah, Rick, you were just asking. We have night tours basically every night.
Yep.
Our
If you
Fridays and Saturday schedules are pretty much fixed with chosen tours, but with at least 48 hours notice, you can go onto our website and take advantage of a choose your own tour slot on
Yes.
other nights of the week. So
And if you're the first one to buy 2 tickets, guess what? You get to pick what route we do.
yeah.
You do have to buy 2 tickets.
You do have to buy 2 tickets, and you have to do it at least 48 hours in advance, and you have to be first to the table. If you're looking for December 26th, that has been claimed already. 2 people took advantage of that for our Churchill Chillers tour will be that night. So So you can come on out and join us for that. Our other choose your own tour nights for the month are pretty much unclaimed and wide open. So you can take advantage of that if you'd like. We would love to have you come on out and share some spooky stuff with you.
Absolutely. But with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're only going to do 2 Victorian stories tonight. The first one is a bit long, but it is an awesome story.
It's a good story. So yeah.
Which one is it?
It is the Green Huntsman.
Yes.
Dun, dun, dun.
Also known as the Haunted Villa.
Yes.
So, the official name was the Green Huntsman, but it got to be called by so many people the Haunted Villa that both names kind of stuck.
Yes. So this was written by Joseph Holt Ingraham, and it's a Christmas legend of Louisiana. Joseph was a reverend, and he was a prolific author from Maine. One critic estimated that in the early 1840s, about 10% of the new novels produced in the U.S. were Ingram's. Yeah.
Pretty incredible.
I was gonna say, I was like, hang on, that's a guy.
10% of all novels in the 1840s in the United States, one guy.
Yep. His novel, The Pillar of Fire, was actually a source for Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
So when Hollywood is using you as a source, you know you're good. So at that point in time, of course, he went on to publish The Green Huntsman. It first appeared in The Lady's Companion in June of 1841, and it was an example of how a Christmas story could be published at any time of the year. It was reprinted in the Huddersfield Chronicle and the West Yorkshire Advertiser in December 24th of 1858. It was a rare English stamp of approval on an American story.
I love the English so much. They make me so happy.
So, because this is so long, we're going to be swapping back and forth with this one. In the Upper Faubourg of New Orleans, a conspicuous
You're off to a great start.
And conspicuous from the river from which it fronts stands a vast square mansion, gray and ruinous through neglect rather than time. A few old moss-stained oaks of centuries' growth rear their majestic heads above its rank lawn, and the hedges and walls that once enclosed it are broken down and utterly destroyed. Everywhere are the marks of it having been in a better day, the abode of the affluence and aristocratic pride, but it was lonely in its dilapidated grandeur, stately imposing even in its ruin. It has for years attracted the eye of the curious stranger as he sailed past, but vainly does the traveler seek to learn from those about him the history of the spot. All he can ascertain is it's called the Haunted Villa. Less than half a mile above this dilapidated edifice, on the estate adjacent, also stands a mansion, which is no less striking for its beauty, adorned with its verandas, porticos, and lattice conservatories, and half hid in the most luxuriant foliage, with the well-appointed hedges of the rose thorn interspersed with lemon, acacia, and pomegranate trees enclosing the lawn of the softest green. It seems the abode of taste, refinement, and graceful affluence, the home of a domestic bliss and social happiness. Never to the 2 mansions or grounds presented a stranger more remarkable contrast, and it made still more striking by their juxtaposition. At the latter villa, on the evening of our story, there was held a Christmas festival, of a gayer and more brilliant description than usual, for it was a bridal night also, and the bride and bridegroom with the joyous train mingled merrily in the holiday festivities. The bride, oh, how shall her matchless beauty be given the eye to the reader? She was of stately stature and graceful as the swan in her movements. Her eyes were dark and burning with the light of love. There was an unfathomable well of feeling in their dangerous depths, and though they could occasionally flash fire and sparkle, their usual aspect was soft and timid as the gazelle's. She was a Fessy, and the man's eyes had seldom looked on a beautiful woman or bridegroom's worshipping glance adored a fairer bride. She was wedded the night of our story in the gorgeous rooms of the mansion just described. The owner of this mansion was a French gentleman. He had been a widower for many years. He called Fessy his child. Some say she was his daughter, others that she was not. But there was evidently a mystery about her. She was just 18 the night of her bridal, which was of course both her birthday and the wedding day at Christmas Eve. The bridegroom was a rich young Creole of Orleans, handsome, chivalrous, well-born, and every way worthy to wear such a bright jewel as a vessie in his bosom. It was a happy and merry night. All the youthful cavaliers for many leagues around were gathered there on the grace of the nuptials, and the 80 maidens with the dark-eyed and raven hair of that sunny clime presented their rival charms in the presence of the incomparable bride. And the wanton waltz and the stately dance, amid never-ceasing strains of ravishing music, and with the numerous scenes of changes of bridal festive, conjoined with Christmas merrymaking, the silvery hours flew swiftly onward. Midnight at length approached, and the blushing bride, half reluctant, half consenting, was borne from the hall by a group of laughing virgins to the nuptial chamber. At the instant a door closed behind her, the festive halls were strangely illuminated with a sudden light of pale green cast out that shone the brilliant candelabra in the rooms, and threw over every face the ghastly parlor of death. At the same instant a loud, heavy, rumbling noise, like under the thunder, applauded every air. "Look, the haunted villa!" shouted several voices on the veranda. We're right there.
Okay. Hi, buddy. All right. In an instant, the halls were deserted, and the veranda and lawn looking in the direction of the ruined mansion were crowded with terrified gazers. Terrific spectacle! The whole interior of the ruin, towards which their eyes were turned, seemed to be on fire. Through every aperture of door and window and gaping crevice, the fire shone out as if from a furnace, with an intense glowing heat. Yet there ascended no smoke from it, nor could there be heard any sound of crackling flame. But what was most fearful was a tongue of green flame, which, rising from the midst of the molten mass, flung itself, lapping and curling high into the air like a serpent, and then contracted and coiled down upon the surface of the bed of fire, again to unfold and dart upward and shed its baleful glare a wide league around. The most death-like silence pervaded the group of banqueters as they looked upon this spectacle. To all the name of the haunted villa was familiar, and to every mind supernatural terror was associated with it. No one breathed. Expectation and alarm sat on every face. Gradually the intensity of the glowing interior lessened, and in a few minutes all became dark as before, save the tongue of flame which continued to curl and wreathe above the central tower with fiercer strength. All at once it disappeared, like a lamp blown out, and in its place a small globe of green fire that shone with a steady light, was alone visible upon the summit of the tower. Awed and full of conjectures and trembling apprehensions, the company instantly broke up. In a few minutes nearly all were on their way to their homes, anxious to place the widest distance between themselves and this spot of supernatural sounds and spectacles. 5 or 6 young men alone remained on the deserted veranda. They were intimate friends of the bridegroom, who himself stood amongst them as they discoursed together on the event. "Did you notice that it was just as the door closed behind the bride?" remarked Don Antonio Baradas, one of the group on the colonnade. "I did, senor," replied Eugene Brissot with animation, "for my eye was following her departure, surrounded by her bridesmaids, and methought I had never seen woman so lovely, and I mourned so bright a star should set to every eye but Henry's." "You all noticed it was just as she left the room, senors?" repeated young Don Antonio, looking round with a marked manner and speaking in a solemn tone. "We did," all answered. "But has this anything to do with—" "Speak, Don Antonio, what evil threatens or is connected with my beloved bride?" demanded the young husband, earnestly grasping his friend's hand. "Listen, senor," answered Don Antonio Baradas. The young cavaliers, joined by one or two ladies, now grouped closer about the young Spaniard as he leaned gracefully against a column, his arms folded within his silk mantle across his breast. His attitude was striking and commanding. His age appeared not less than 30, but care or deep and active thought had worn on his face strong lines, which, while they added to its intellect, took from his youth. He had been very handsome and was still striking for his manly appearance. His figure was tall and slender and finely shaped, his complexion so dark as to approach a swarthy hue. His features were finely aquiline, and his large dark eyes beamed with the fire of intelligence. Sometimes there was in them a strangeness of expression terrible to look upon, while ere it could be commented on, those who observed it passed away, instantly followed by the sweetest smile human lips ever wore. With the early history of Don Antonio, none were acquainted. He had come to New Orleans on a Christmas Eve 8 years before, a traveler, and is the heir of a noble Cuban family. After a sojourn of a few weeks, he gave out that he had become so much pleased with the city as to determine to abide there permanently. His lodgings were magnificently furnished, and his horse and equipage he rivaled the wealthiest Creoles. He soon found friends, and the halls of the oldest and best families of the land were thrown open to him. He was admired for his wit, accomplishments, and manly graces, and everywhere courted for his wealth. Thus, for 7 years had Don Antonio lived among the hospitable and refined Orleanians. During all this, while it was remarked that he never had drank wine nor spoken to a woman, though the loveliest in the world were alluring him with their smiles, between him and Henry Clavier, the bridegroom, there had existed a long and close intimacy. He had now been invited to wait on him as a groomsman, but had singularly and strangely to his friend declined, saying he could be present only as a guest. "Listen, Signor," he said, in an impressive manner, as his friends gathered around him, their curiosity aroused by the tone and emphasis of his words. "It is 21 minutes yet to midnight. There will be full time till 12 for me to speak. Patience, Henry. Thy bride hath not gone 10 minutes, and thou must wait for the cathedral bell to toll midnight ere thou'st leave us." "The cathedral bell? It was never heard at this distance," exclaimed several. "It will be heard here tonight, as if swinging within the dome of this hall," he answered in a deep voice that with his words made each heart weigh heavier in the bosom against which it audibly throbbed. "Yonder mansion, my friends, was built by a Castilian noble, in whose veins flowed the best blood of Spain. His wealth was inexhaustible. He possessed also boundless ambition, and never did human life stand between him and his object. His passions were evil and indulged at any sacrifice. He lived solitary in a lonely castle amid the most fertile and lovely region of Castile. There he associated only with his gold, which he kept in coffers in his vaults, and with his horse and black hounds, with which he used to hunt every Christmas Eve from sunset to sunrise. In company, it is said, with the free spirits of the air, with whom, riding like the wind, they traversed the kingdom in its breadth and length ere the dawn. And what think you he hunted, my friends? A Castilian maid, who should be both perfectly beautiful and perfectly blind. For there is a tradition in Spain that such a maiden shall become the mother of an emperor who shall unite all the kingdoms of Europe into one empire. But it was not for this he would possess this blind beauty. He was a person, the ugliest and most hideous man in all of Spain. Men looked upon him in disgust, and women with fear. He wanted a wife, and forsooth one that was beautiful too, for next to his money and hounds he admired women. But no female could be found to marry him, so hideous was his visage, for all the gold in his coffers. He had heard of this tradition, and the idea of having a bride who should be perfectly beautiful and yet be blind was highly gratifying to his vanity, for he could feast upon her charms while she would be ignorant of his ugliness. "And why should he seek her by night?" demanded Don Antonio's listeners. It is said he had a talisman purchased by a mint of golden zecchero of Pius VI, by which he would be guided to the abode of such a maiden, who could be borne off, says the tradition, only at the midnight hour and while buried in deep sleep. At length, one Christmas Eve, when this Castilian noble was 30 years of age, he sallied forth with hound and horse and horn to seek the blind and beautiful maiden for his bride. It was a few minutes before midnight that the priests, who were chanting prayers in a monastery in the Pyrenees Valley, heard the unusual sounds of huntsmen and the hoarse bay of hounds approaching in full cry. The sounds came nearer and grew louder and yet louder. And all at once the wide doors of the chapel burst open, and this young Castilian noble rode in at top speed, followed by his pack, and galloped straight towards the altar. The horror-stricken priests seized the golden crucifix that stood upon it and held it up between the sacred place and intruders, whom they believed to be the spirit of the wicked huntsman of the Pyrenees and no mortal man. Without heeding the priests or their crucifix, Don Ronaldo Orsormo, for that was his name, leapt from his coal-black steed and passed through a small wicket that led into the cloisters of the nunnery. With a rapid step he traversed the corridor and stopped before a cell, the door of which was closed. It flew open at his touch. On a low couch, her features faintly visible by a lamp burning beside it, slept a nun of the most perfect symmetry of limbs and features. Don Ronaldo knelt beside her and lifted the lamp so as to observe a more perfect view of her face. It was transcendently lovely. He smiled with satisfaction and, lifting her in his arms, bore her forth into the corridor. "How knew he that a maiden slept there?" asked one of the group. "By the talisman on his whip, it is said." "What was that, Don Antonio?" "A lock of the Virgin Mary's hair braided in the snapper," says the legend. The plant lash would straighten and point forward as he held it in his hand in the direction he should proceed. Its touch opened all barriers and gave him ingress into the innermost closet of castle or cot. But the imperious noble was soon to learn that he could not enter, even with such a talisman, a consecrated temple and bear off with impunity a bride of the church. His punishment, though long deferred, came. He returned into the chapel with his prize ere the terrified monks had recovered from their astonishment. Leaping upon his steed and followed by his hounds, he spurred down the echoing aisles again and left the convent as the bell tolled midnight. The noise of his riding and the bay of his hounds breaking far and wide upon the stillness of the night as he coursed homeward down the valley.
Don Ronaldo soon reached his castle and laid his intended bride on the gorgeous couch. Then, sending for musicians, he placed them in a concealed alcove and bade them to play their softest strains till she awoke. How was he certain that she was blind as well as beautiful, Don Antonio?
Cats.
Asked one of the group. He believed in the faithfulness of his talisman. How could she be beautiful if she were blind, Don Antonio? Asked Eugene. Methinks the lady's beauty lies mostly in her eye. The tradition saith that the maiden in question is to be perfectly beautiful, but still perfectly blind. She must therefore have perfect eyes to the observer, though useless to herself in the instruments of visions. Poor lady, sighed the young cavalier. I prithee, proceed with thy story, Signor Antonio, the impatient bridegroom said. It indeed becomes to me to hasten, for the midnight hour is near at hand. Don Romaldo, having arrayed himself magnificently and perfumed himself with the costliest of essence of Persia, stood concealed behind the curtains of her couch to witness her awakening. At last the music stole into her senses, and she slowly began to open her eyes and throw off the deep sleep that had weighed upon the fringed lids. Don Romaldo watched her with the most intense interest. He trembled lest she should be deceived, for already he passionately loved her. She rose on her couch and gazed about her. Her eyes were blue as heaven, large and liquid and full of love and feeling. But whether they had vision he was unable to determine. He was about to show himself and make the trial, but he restrained on the impulse and remained still concealed, feeling assured that in a few moments it would be decided. She looked around her upon the damask hangings that were on all sides of her enveloped couch, but there was no individual object about her to arrest and fix the eye. She now threw back her golden hair from her forehead, as if perfectly awake, and gazed around with intelligent surprise, too visibly depicted on her features in the enlargement of her dilated eye to be mistaken.
We're having connection issues.
Oh boy. Hopefully you'll be able to keep watching us. Now, Don Ronaldo's heart began to sink within him. She looked each moment more bewildered and alarmed. Holy Virgin, where am I? She cried at length, in a voice which alarm had made most sweetly touching. These silken hangings, this heavenly music, this gorgeous chamber, for she had now put aside the curtains. Whether I have been born in my sleep. It were heaven, not yonder lattice with a view of distant stars, though. Tell me, am I yet on earth? She sees, and the talisman has played me false. Cursed be it, and the head it grew upon, muttered Don Ronaldo through his clenched teeth. He was about to rush forward and bury his dagger in her heart, for his vanity and pride would not allow him to permit her to see his features. And as much as he already loved her, and the thought of seeing her shudder at their ugliness was a madness to him. He had rather slay her with his own hand, and he was about to do so when suddenly his arm was arrested by a light touch. He turned and saw it beheld a low black figure, with a body no higher than its knees, with a prodigious head, in the brow of which he set a single eye of green flame like a shining emerald, and with hands and arms of supernatural length. Avaunt, fiend, he cried, starting back with a horror and affright. Fear me not, Don Ronaldo, said the dwarf in a low, hoarse tone. I know thy disappointment. She has eyes brighter than stars. By heavens she hath. How do you know my thoughts and purposes? Demanded he with surprise. It matters not. I can aid thy purpose. How? Destroy her vision. Thou hellhound, wouldst thou mar such glorious beauty? She shall die by my hand first. I will not mar it. I will just take her sight away, nor lay hand upon her. Give me proof of it, and I shall attempt it. I would give half my wealth so it could be. Give me proof. The demon dwarf fixed upon him a single eye, and for an instant, with such a steady gaze, Don Ronaldo's eyes were irresistibly riveted upon it as if fascinated. In vain he tried to take them off. They were no longer subservient to his will. The demon's eye grew larger and larger, brighter and brighter, and each moment, till the light of it became painfully intense, it seemed to Don Ronaldo's eyes to fill the whole space before him and pervade the whole room. By degrees it then faded away, lessening, growing dimmer and dimmer, until it left the place into his dark vision as midnight. Where art thou, fiend, that thou hast charmed me and thus left me in darkness? Don Ronaldo, dost thou find thyself in darkness? Said the dwarf, speaking from the self-same spot where Don Ronaldo had last seen him. Art thou here, demon? Who hath extinguished the lights? No lights are extinguished, Don Ronaldo. The darkness is thy own vision. Thou art stoned blind. Thou liest. Ho, lights! Lights, knaves! Bring lights! They may call for the lights until they rival in the brightness of the sun, and thou shalt not see their brilliancy. Fiend, hast thou done this? With a single glance of my eye, I have given thee but proof thou didst seek. Look upon me once more. I see thee not. Be patient, and I will restore thy vision. The demon then placed a finger upon each eyelid of Don Ronaldo, pressing upon them, asked him if he saw 2 golden rings. I do, answered Don Ronaldo. Fix thy inward gaze upon them, as steady, but as now as you fixed your external gaze upon my eye. Don Ronaldo did so with effort, but by degree of the golden rings they enlarged, until he seemed to be in a universe of rosette light. The dwarf then removed his fingers and opened his eyes. All around him then seemed an atmosphere of pure light, but no object was visible. Gradually the light assumed a delicate blue shade, then a green color, and it seemed to gather itself into the circle opposite him. The circle gradually lessened in size, increased in brilliancy. He kept his eyes steadily upon it as if by supernatural energy, until it diminished into a small orb. That orb was the dwarf's eye, whom he now beheld standing in his presence before. That is enough. Thou shalt make use of thy power, said Don Ronaldo. She is on yonder couch. The terms are the souls of the children she may bring thee, said the dwarf, without moving. Don Ronaldo started. He saw the visitor was resolute, but it is a contingency at best. Though, he said, I consent, he said hesitantly. Lay thy thumb and thy forefinger upon my eyelid, and it shall be thy oath, said the demon. Don Ronaldo did so, and the dwarf then placed himself on the foot of the couch in the shadow, so that his bright green eye alone was visible from it. It instantly arrested the maiden's eyes, and from her glance was fascinated. In a few moments her vision was forever darkened. The demon departed as suddenly as he had appeared. Don Romaldo stood by the couch of the blind maiden. He watched her motions. Her gaze was vacant, and her hands moved like one who is in the dark. Alas, alas, whither am I borne? To what fate am I doomed? A moment since I was all bright, and now gorgeous, and now it's all dark as midnight. Ay de me, helpless vessel. Nay, sweet lady, said Don Romaldo in a gentle tone, for his visage was as hideous as his voice was soft and harmonious. You are brought from the damp cells of the cloisters, the halls of luxury and affluence, to a noble castle that awaits you to hail you as its mistress, to a true knight's home, who is ready to lay his heart and his honor at your feet.
Thus, and in like manner spoke Don Ronaldo. His soothing voice and tender speech at length won her ear, and she listened to him with pleasure. But the story of his wooing and nuptials, and of her submission to her blindness, for which she could not account, and which, be it mentioned here, did nothing mar her beauty, must be passed over. Years rolled by, and Don Ronaldo had become the father of 7 beautiful daughters, every one of whom had been born on a Christmas Eve. He loved his lovely and sightless wife each succeeding year more and more. Blessings seemed to flow in upon him on every side. The only desire he had now, to complete his happiness, was for a son, that he might have heir to his name and vast estates. But this wish he was never destined to see fulfilled. At length, his eldest daughter reached her 18th year, and a neighboring young noble who had won her heart was to lead her to the altar on her birthday eve. The bridal party were assembled, and rites were performed, and the hours of festivity flew on with joy and hope. The bride, who was scarcely less lovely than Henrids, was in midst of a waltz when the castle clock told 12. Ere the last stroke had ceased vibrating upon the ears of the banqueters, there entered the hall a tall, dark stranger in a green velvet dress richly studded with emeralds. In his bonnet was a sable plume fastened by an emerald that glowed like fire, and at his belt was a hunting horn. His aspect was noble, and his face intellectual. His entrance drew nearly all eyes upon him, but there was something about him that made Don Ronaldo's heart shrink with ominous foreboding. He strode across the hall to the spot where Don Ronaldo was seated, and said in a low tone, "Don Ronaldo, I have come for thy daughter." Don Ronaldo started back and looked at him in the face for an instant, and then with a shriek fell backwards in the arm of his attendants. Leaving him, the stranger then approached the bride as she yet circled in the waltz. For a while, in its giddy mazes, she had not yet noticed his entrance. He stood near her and sought to catch her eye. He succeeded. Instantly, she stopped, as if paralyzed, and then, without turning her glance aside from his steady gaze, approached him. He receded from her as she did so, still keeping upon her his riveted gaze, which seemed to fascinate her like a serpent's. For as he moved across the hall, she followed him as if irresistibly drawn along solely by the power of his eye. He now took his way through the hall in the direction of the outer gate of the castle, steadily looking back towards her over his shoulder, while like a hound she continued to follow step for step. All arrayed in her bridal robes and sparkling with jewels, with a face like death's and eyes supernaturally dilated, she went on after him, looking neither to the right nor to the left. Poor maiden, without once removing his glance from her terrified eyes, the stranger passed out of the hall, descended the marble steps to the court below, and crossed the court to the outer gate, and through hall, corridor, and courtyard the charmed bride followed him, keeping the same distance behind until she disappeared after him through the portal. Of the guests, all were at first paralyzed and following them at a distance, the boldest, nor even the bridegroom himself, having the power to attempt her rescue. Slowly behind her they followed, with silent amazement and horror, till the ill-fated bride had disappeared through the gate, when the spell that seemed to have bound all present was broken. "Ho, cavaliers and gentlemen, to the rescue!" was the universal cry. Ere they reached the gate, they heard the receding footsteps of horsemen and the full cry of hounds, as if a huntsman was scouring the country at the head of his pack. The sounds soon died away in distant glen, and from that night forward nothing was ever heard of the bride that had been so strangely charmed away. The next day, Don Rinaldo, who alone could unravel this mystery, sent 10,000 gold pistols to the convent from whence he had abducted his wife 19 years before, praying that masses might be nightly offered for his daughter's soul. 2 years elapsed, and time, which heals all things, had in some degree thrown over this event its oblivious veil, when the second daughter, not less lovely than the eldest, attained her 18th year, and on her birthnight was led to the altar by a noble Aragonese cavalier. As before, it was a night of mirth and festivity. Alas for it! When the clock struck 12, the bride was just entering her bridal chamber. On the threshold, she looked back to receive Don Rinaldo's blessing when her eye encountered the fixed glance of the swart stranger. With a shudder, she turned back from the very threshold of the bridal chamber and followed him at a short distance behind, through hall, court, and corridor to the outer gate of the castle. Again were heard, a moment afterwards, the huntsman and his hounds coursing up the glen, again the cavaliers present, till now spellbound, rushed forth to the rescue, but never from that time forward was there intelligence of the fate of the second daughter of Don Rinaldo Osormo. By a strange fatality, the bridal night was always on the birthday night, which happened ever on Christmas Eve, the anniversary of the night on which Don Rinaldo committed the sacrilege of abducting the novice. Doubtless the Holy Church had something to do with this terrible punishment and the loss of his daughter, said Eugene Brissot. Don Antonio Baradas smiled coldly and significantly, and without replying continued. That these nuptials should be suffered to take place a second and a third time after such a horrible consummation of them is no less strange than that the parties should be so little affected by circumstances that ought to have made a lasting impression on every mind. It would seem that Don Rinaldo and his friends and daughters' wooers were one and all afflicted with a judicial blindness. A third, a fourth, and a fifth bridal took place, with 2 years' interval between each, with precisely the same results: the nightly appearance at the stroke of 12 of the dark stranger, the fascination of the bride, her submissive following and disappearance, with the retiring sound of horse and hounds winding up the glen. What is most remarkable connected with this affair was that at each visit of the dark stranger, the sightless mother recovered her vision during the time he was present, but immediately lost it on his departure. At the loss of her fifth daughter, she died of a broken heart for her bereavements. At length, Don Rinaldo roused himself at this series of judgments and resolved to avert the fate of his 2 remaining daughters, one of whom was 16 and the other, the youngest of all, but 6 years of age. For this purpose he secretly left his castle and his native land, and came hither as if the wide sea were a wall between justice and the adjudged. He built yonder solitary and gloomy mansion, and defended its portals with iron gates. He consecrated every stone with holy water, and in every threshold sunk a silver cross. The 2 years elapsed as before, and strange infatuation, he suffered his daughter to be led to the altar on her 18th birthday. A wealthy and high-born young Creole had wooed and won her. Don Rinaldo gave his consent, believing the power he dreaded would not reach him here. He wished, too, with a resistless curiosity, to relieve his mind by the trial. He incurred the risk and sacrificed his daughter. Did the green stranger appear? Asked every voice. True to the hour and stroke of midnight. The bride followed him from the drawing rooms and across the lawn, and a moment afterward the sound of horse and horn resounded along the winding shore till lost in the dark cypress forest to the south. The guests fled from the fatal halls in terror, but none could afterwards tell the tale or describe the scene. A spell seemed to have been laid upon their memories. All was confused and indistinct when they would recall it, but the impression of a supernatural presence there on that night remained uneffaced. From that time, the haunted villa became the scene of mysteries no man could unravel. The The morning after this supernatural event, Envignard, our noble host, was surprised at the entrance of Don Ronaldo, leading in his youthful daughter, a beautiful child in her 8th year. To him, Don Ronaldo consigned her after telling him the strange story you have heard me relate. With him, he left the keys to coffers of gold in the vaults of his mansion, and then, blessing his daughter, took his leave of her forever. He is now, as a rigid and holy monk, doing penance day and night in the monastery which he had so sacrilegiously violated. Where is Envignard? Methinks I have not seen him present among you.
A low groan now arrested every ear. A figure laid upon the ground in a kneeling posture. It was M. Vignard. He had fainted there at first sight of the spectacle that the haunted villa had presented. Fessy had been to him like his own child. He felt that the curse had not departed from her race, and had fallen forward insensible, with a cry for mercy, mercy, for her on his lips. They lifted him up and laid him on an ottoman. Those who assisted him were scarce more alive than himself. Don Antonio's tale had filled the soul of everyone that listened to it with horror. Henriette, the bridegroom, stood before Don Antonio like a statue of stone, and all eyes were fixed upon the young Spaniard in silence. They expected something, they knew not what, but something would harrow their senses and chill their blood. The connection of the fearful tale with the bride was too plain to be mistaken. "Let us save her or die with her, good Antonio," cried Eugene. "Hark, it is 12 o'clock," they cried, in the deep voice of fearful expectation. "It is the cathedral bell. Saints preserve us!" that fell from the ever pliant lip. At the last stroke, Don Antonio cast aside his silken cloak. From his tall figure stood before them the Green Huntsman, the stalwart stranger of his tale. Without a word, he left them. Entering the drawing room from the veranda, crossed to the door from which Fessy had gone with her bridesmaids. It opened ere he touched it. Passing on, he traversed the suite of the lighted rooms until he came to the door of the nuptial chamber. Disrobed of her rich bridal attire, Fessy was standing among her bridesmaids in a robe de chambre and a cap of snowy white, that made her look, if possible, still more lovely than ever. The door swung open, and Don Antonio instantly fixed his eye upon hers and turned to leave the chamber. She clasped her hands together in agony, as if instinctively she knew her fate, and followed him. He did not keep his eyes upon her constantly, but strode forward without looking behind, as if satisfied she followed. Twice she stopped and stood still, wringing her hands. He had only glanced at her back over his shoulder at such times, and she came crouching along close at his feet. Thus he led the ill-fated bride to the hall and forth to the veranda. Here stood Henriette, he stood Eugene, and their friends. They beheld him advancing and saw him pass by close to the spot where they stood. They saw, oh horror, oh heavenly pity, they saw too that she was following him, now stopping and wringing her snowy hands as he took her eyes from her. Now as he turned and fixed them upon her, crouching and moving mournfully in his fateful footsteps. Yet they could not move hand nor foot to save her. Henri's eyes followed his bride with a glassy stare. The brave Eugene seemed to be devastated. Every vital function and sense gave a singular sense of horror. Thrice she tried to turn and look back upon her husband, but each time his eye arrested the movement of her head and drew her still on. From the veranda they traversed the lawn. They reached the gate and passed through it, and the next moment it was heard the galloping of horse and the sounds of hounds, and those on the veranda distinctly beheld the Green Huntsman riding like the wind in the direction of the haunted villa, bearing before him on his saddle the helpless victim bride. As he rode, they saw his form change, for he seemed to emit a horrid shining light that exhibited him as plainly as the noonday to their vision, and he assumed the form of the hideous dwarf. On rode the demon and his victim, and on followed the pack of black hounds, baying in full cry. All at once the haunted villa became illuminated as before, with a red glare through the window, a portal and crevice, and while again the writhing tongue of the green flame lapped in the air, and the shale shed a baleful light all a league fully around. The demon, with his victim borne before him, followed by his whole sable pack, now turned into the lawn, rode towards the infernal mansion at the wildest speed. Without pausing, they all, rider, victim, horse, and hound, dashed through the yawning portal and leapt into the midst of the glowing furnace. Shrieks and yells most piercing and the appalling rent the air. The flames were suddenly extinguished, and in an instant darkness and a terrible gloom shrouded the spot where a moment before seemed to yawn the sulphurous mouth of hell. Such is the legend of the haunted villa, and such is the penalty of a parent's crime, which sooner or later heaven will punish, even making it wicked spirits the instruments of its just vengeance. This will be more apparent when we end the wicked Don Ronaldo is seen, which will be narrated in a subsequent legend.
So we have to dig that one up. We have to dig that one up and see if we can find it.
Yeah.
So yes.
A little more
But
digging.
that is the tale of the Green Huntsman, or the Haunted Villa.
Yes.
So
this one's much shorter.
this next one is much shorter. Excuse
Bless
me.
you.
I'm coughing, but thank you. But yes, so we do have one more story for you this evening.
Coughing still lets demons in, by the way.
What's that?
Coughing, it still lets demons in.
Oh, okay. Our house is probably full of demons then.
Probably.
Between our coughing and the cat's coughing and
The guide's coughing.
yes.
I was just clearing my throat.
I'm just trying to get it out.
So
It's stuck.
now this next story is called "Warned by the Wire," and it is by Lewis Glass. And this particular story might be indebted to Charles Dickens's 1866 story, "The Signal Man," which we did actually on the show a few years ago.
Yes, we did.
I think we did it in December 2020, I think. So if you want to go back and listen to The Signal Man, you can go back and check out that episode from a few years back.
Did we talk about the Signalman?
Yeah.
I missed that.
So that was a few
that
years
was
ago.
COVID still.
Oh, I love the Signalman. Did you guys know that?
Yes.
I did.
Yes, I did.
You did? I didn't
I
know
did.
that.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
And I
But
like Dickens, but
yeah.
I like Signalman.
This one was, you could say, maybe arguably Signal Man. So, anyways, but yeah, its environment of railroad telegraphy was drawn right from the life of its author. Now, Lewis Glass, who lived from 1845 to 1924, was not known as a writer, but he had himself been a telegraph operator, a mining superintendent, a manager of both the Pacific States and the Sunset Telephone and Telegraph Companies, as well as manager of the Pacific Phonograph Company, and was co-inventor of the nickel-in-the-slot phonograph, which was basically a forerunner of the jukebox. The following tale first appeared as the first of a page full of stories under the heading Ghosts by the Glare of the Coals in the San Francisco Call on December 25th, 1895. I have in mind an incident of my life that has been a great mystery to me. A mystery simply because it has never been explained even to the smallest extent. Back in the 1860s, when railroad building was new on this coast, I was a telegraph operator for a small road running between two of the mountain towns in this state. In constructing the line, I was utilized as a traveling operator, my duties being to remain with the construction force and handle the wire running to headquarters. My instrument was of that variety used for light telegraphy and could easily be transported from place to place, batteries and all. The division superintendent and myself occupied bunks arranged for us in a small red boxcar that had been fitted up with a few conveniences and so arranged that while on the road we would be able to enjoy a few of the comforts of civilization. We generally retired about 8 o'clock, being fatigued with the day's work, and as a rule our slumbers were undisturbed until daybreak. The night I have in mind, which was the beginning of this mystery, was cool, and being worn out with the labor of the day, I went to my couch prepared for a good rest. No sooner had I touched the pillow than I was lost in slumber. Just how long I slept, I do not know. Now I am able to recall the hour of my awakening, but I certainly was aroused by the ticking of my instrument, a most unusual procedure after sunset. It seemed to be running wild, but the sound of it fully restored me to wakefulness. I listened attentively, and my practiced ear caught the words as they came to me clearly and with great regularity. Could it be possible that I was yet asleep? I got up and walked over to the little shell upon which rested the key. No, I was not asleep. Everything was too clear to me, and the ominous click ticked out the following sentence. Spike driver Catton will be killed in the new cut tomorrow at 10:30. I was appalled and bewildered at this intelligence and sat down to think it out. There was no use for me to attribute it to supernatural influence. I did not believe in such things. Finally, I went back to bed with the conviction that someone had hoaxed me from the other end. Calmly and without mental discomfort, I rolled over and went to sleep again. In the morning, the matter was almost forgotten, and the gang of men went out to work, as was the daily custom. I saw Catton pass by my door with a spike hammer on his back, but merely recalled the message of the night before for an instant. As he passed from view, I forgot all about it and returned to my key. I had been working for a few hours, and in order to stretch myself a little, I got up and stepped off the car for the purpose of taking a walk up to the cut to see how things were getting on. As I turned the curve which brought the section men into view, a dull, rumbling sound struck my ears, and looking up, I saw to my horror about 20 tons of rock fall away from the main bank and come crashing down over Catton, the spike driver. In an instant, I knew it was all up with him, and when we recovered his remains, they were crushed out of all semblance to a human being. Imagine my feelings when I recalled that message of the previous night and the indifference with which I had received it. Was I responsible for Catton's death? The thought disturbed me greatly, but after looking at the matter from every conceivable point of view, I came to the conclusion that I was not. Catton was a marked man, and he met his fate. I confess, however, that I was not as regular in my slumbers after that, and I would awaken with a start at the slightest suggestion of a tick from my instrument. The strain of anticipation was awful. Catton was insured, and the widow received over $3,000. One day I saw her, and she seemed more content with the money than with her lamented husband. I gradually got over brooding about the affair. It took me 6 weeks, though, and I am sure it told upon me. After a time, I let it pass out of my mind altogether, as my head was filled with the business of getting the road to the next town. Fate, however, did not intend that I should be free from misery, and the next visitation came to me under quite different circumstances. It was late in the afternoon, and I was getting away my daily report. When I sent 30 and closed the key, my receiver straightway ticked back, Ty Walker Hopkins will fall in a culvert at 5:25 and break his legs.
This time, I acted instantly, and manning a handy car with 8 men, I urged them to backtrack with all possible speed. It was 5:20 when we got underway, and there were 2 miles to cover. Never was a handcar sent along the rails like that one. The minutes seemed to glide away with a wonderful rapidity, but I feared that we were too late. As the car swung into the canyon, Hopkins, threw up both hands and stumbled into the culvert. Our speed was so rapid that it was impossible to stop the car as we passed over him, as he lay on the rocks beneath, groaning in pain. It took us but a moment to get to his assistance, but both legs were broken and he was helpless. It was no use to grieve over this accident. I had taken every possible precaution to avert the disaster, but without success. I gave as reason for my hasty manning of handcar that I wanted to see the unfortunate man on some track business, and that I forgot to give him the order of my excitement in seeing him injured. I feared to convey my knowledge to anyone, and would doubtless refrain from it today if it were not for the fact that the incidents being so far back in my history. We gave Hopkins comfort, and after he had been fixed up and sent back to the other end of the line, I went straight to my car and tore the receiver from its fastenings, vowing I would no longer have such a damnable prophet at my elbow. I fixed another instrument where the first had been, and from that time on I received no more messages while working on the new line. When we got through to the adjoining town, I packed my valise and started for San Francisco, and moved by some invisible power, I placed the old receiver in the depths of my bag, and I considered it a curiosity. To this day, I'm thankful I took it with me, as I consider it my savior. Its third message, and the one that made me swear never to let it get out of my possession, came to me in Stockton. Although the instrument was connected with no live wires, I had packed it in its customary corner of my grip, and was just bidding the clerk goodbye. As I walked out of the door towards the train, I heard something ticking in my grip. I listened perfectly dumbfounded and heard the repeated several times, "Do not go today." Was this another warning that a disaster awaited me? Perhaps others? Certainly I would have yet had time to stop the train if I had made haste. No, on second thought, I would not do that. People would call me a crank. I would return to the hotel and wait for results. Following my thoughts slowly, I walked back and informed the clerk that I concluded to stay a little longer. On the following morning, I eagerly sought the daily papers, and as I expected, that train was ditched and the man who accompanied the berth directly over the one I had engaged had his back broken and he was crippled for life. When my time comes, that instrument will tell me the day and the hour.
So, inspired by the Signal Man just a little bit.
Yep.
A little bit there.
A little bit. But, ladies and gentlemen, that is our stories for this evening.
Yes.
Now, next week, well, we had 2 tonight. I think
We're going to try to get you 3.
we're going to try and
We're
get
going to
3.
check length.
Yeah, we're going to check length. We'll see how... Did he bite you?
A little snot.
He
Rude.
does that.
Ooh.
Rude.
And got it in full glory on video. Got the video evidence. Anyway.
You're getting cold for Christmas.
Oh,
You can find it at the train tracks.
gosh. Yes.
Yeah, you are totally getting coal in your stocking for Christmas.
But anyway, so yes, we hope that you enjoyed the stories as much as we have. We love these old Victorian Christmas tales.
I have a collection of them on the Kindle.
Yes. So yes, and Rick did ask where we get these from, and they are recorded. There's various anthologies of
Victorian ghost stories.
Victorian Christmas ghost stories. So
Well, most Victorian ghost stories have a tendency to be Christmas.
yeah.
It's a common framing device for them to be like, oh, I told this ghost story at Christmas, and it rarely actually has to do with Christmas. It's just a ghost story.
That was oftentimes the case. Yeah, they might say this happened during Christmas time, and that'll be the last mention of Christmas in the story. It's really completely irrelevant to it, but still, it's a good story. It can be a good story. But yeah, so that will we'll go ahead. We will sign off for this evening. Again, we will be back just this next week.
Yes.
So set your timers. We'll be back in 7 days. Yeah, we'll hope that you'll come back and join us for a few more of these tales. And yeah.
And have a good week.
Have a good week. And yeah, do remember, you can come on out and join us just about any time. So yeah, we got those tours running basically every night of the week. The only caveats with the Choose Your Own tours, you have to buy 2 tickets and you have to do it at least 48 hours in advance. So if you see one of those Choose Your Own tour opportunities, don't wait till the last minute because it won't be there. It won't be there. So with that, we will bid you all adieu. If you do have any other questions or anything like that, shoot us a note anytime. Happy to hear from you. And again, have a good week, y'all.
Bye.